Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm okay, but I might be being controlled by somebody else. You never know. How about you?
Yeah, I often feel the same, but I just think that's married life. So, yes, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the special episode of Black Mirror, Bandersnatch, or I struggle to say this in any other way than Bandersnatch, because I had this is obviously from the Jabberwocky poem that was in Alice with the Looking Glass, and I had a tape of something, I can't remember if it was tape or record, but I had a tape of of a recording of this read by a Scottish person, the strong Scottish accent, and this Bandersnatch was Bandersnatch, and I don't know the rest of it, but that has stuck with me since childhood. So I was kind of sort of, yeah, when I see this, I thought it was kind of weird. But yeah, the story of this is a young programmer starts to question reality when he adapts a mad writer's fantasy novel into a video game based in 1984. So Julian, what were your initial thoughts then on Bandersnatch?
Well, I had put off watching this for quite some time. I mean, I obviously knew about it. It was kind of a big deal that Netflix dropped this interactive Black Mirror special. But, you know, I never really got around to watching it. And once I did, you know, for this episode, I was initially really charmed by it. And I thought, oh, this plays very well. I've done some of the other Netflix kind of interactive stuff. And experimented with that, and I thought, oh, okay, this is working really well. But then the more time passed, I actually went through this whole thing twice. And the more time passed, the more I thought, this is a train wreck.
Okay.
So, you know, I sort of feel like my initial impression was, oh, this works well. It's quite clever. I'm enjoying the kind of meta-fictional aspects of it. And then by the end, I was like, right, there's no story.
No, there's not. I agree with that. I'll agree with that up front. That there's, but I don't think there's supposed to be. And I almost think that's it. One of the things is I obviously criticised Charlie Brooker, as we've gone through the Black Mirror stuff, has been some of his story sort of, you know, some of his story sort of things. We've talked about world building and how sort of like, you know, he often gets to conclusions or sort of misses things that we think like, you know, that should really been touched on, that sort of thing. Weirdly, with this one, I didn't have that complaint, and I was like, by it not having, there are certain things I will say that aren't as obvious as I think they should be. We'll talk about the rabbit, the teddy bear thing, but I kind of like the fact that this didn't have like a cohesive story. It sort of added to that chaotic confusion that it sort of generates, and to me that really kind of worked, because this was about sort of, like I say, the madness of a fantasy writer writing his choose your own adventure, and then this thing of like the frustration of programming and things not working, and but yeah, no, I don't know. I think I went through it once. And actually, when I got to the end, it gave me, it says exit to credits, or you can go back and do bits and pieces. So I went all that, and I went through all the endings and stuff. And so, you know, I think I'm not saying it's not a masterpiece by any stretch, but I was definitely entertained by this.
Well, I would say that, like, basically the first time through, I was sort of entertained and pretty charmed sort of halfway through it. And I went through all the endings. I would go back and and a lot of stuff unlocks. Like once you've seen certain things, it
Yes.
unlocks other paths and stuff. And I thought, okay, I'm very disappointed with what this has sort of turned out to be. Um, I will then devote the next night to going through again and finding additional sort of endings, because there has to be one where he completes the game and it does better than 2.5 stars or whatever the other endings are. Nope, no, there's no ending like that. It's just all the paths go off into utter incoherence. I mean, I think the most satisfying one is the sort of Netflix ending where you're seeing the production of the Netflix show Bandersnatch. You know, so at least that's a kind of, it plays into the metafiction. But I mean, there's a whole ending where he dies while he's talking to the counselor, where it just cuts to that and he just dies for no reason on the couch. I mean, you can hardly think of a less satisfying ending.
Well, I would say the endings. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think the least satisfying parts of this are the endings, and I honestly think that's a Charlie Brooker problem. I think he's really struggled with it. I would agree with you wholeheartedly. And what was funny is I was watching the endings and I was thinking, oh, you've got that from this, or you've got it from there. Like there was, like none of them felt wholly original. You know what I mean? Like, oh, he ends up in prison. Okay, fine. Like you said, the one where they, spoilers to everyone if you haven't done this, but you know our Trek by now. But the one I ended up reaching for, actually, before, because did you go when you did the first time? Did you just go through and make all decisions, or did you flip back and forth then as well?
No, I made the decisions, but when I'd come to an end, I would go back and just
keep
going.
What ending did you get to first?
God, I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, so
I've done it so many times now.
But... Yeah. Okay. Well, the first one I got to was where they have the fight in. They're like, well, if this was a film, wouldn't it be more exciting if, shouldn't there be more entertainment? Like, shouldn't there be a big fight or something? And then they have like a rather poorly choreographed fight in her office. And when he gets dragged out of the room, then his dad sort of, or someone like drags him out into the street, and he's like, how's that for entertainment, bitch? And then it was like, go back to this or exit to credits. It was very sort of like, oh, that's the ending you've reached, huh? Like, it was sort of a bit like I was very sort of, it just stopped. And that was like the least satisfying ending. And there was a few others where I was like, huh, at least these others seem to tie into this wider story.
I think the first ending that I reached was actually him saying yes to the game makers, which goes straight to an ending, right? Like, that's like 3 choices in, and that goes straight to like, okay, you've rushed the game out and it's a disappointing game. So that kind of sets you up to think, okay, he might go mad in these other timelines, but the goal is kind of like to get the game released and be successful.
I did the same. So this is where, like I say, because I did the same. I said yes first time round, and I said yes, and like I said, but then I made it so he. I think I even said I can't remember if he sort of stayed in the office and worked with a team, but basically it ended up them getting the game out, and it was a 2-star. The guy was, oh, it's a disaster. It's sort of, it just fizzles out. Blah blah blah. What was interesting about this from this point of view was, and I'm curious as to how much, because they talk about control, right? And it struck me about halfway through, how much control are we actually having on this thing? Like how, up to a point, how variant are those prongs for the decision making, right? And the reason I say that is because when he goes around to that second time, right? So if you said yes to the game, or you said no, because I said no the second, I did it and said no, And he still
Right.
says, well, I'm not saying no. What I'm saying is yes, but I want to do it at home.
Mm-hmm.
And you still end up with the same result, pretty much. Like that first time round is he does it at home, but he still, and then it sort of like it gets to him, and he goes off. The review is still 2.5 stars, but it trails off. Is the result? And
if
so
he
you
says yes and
no 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 no
develops
no
it
no no no.
in-house.
If you say no and he develops it at home, it's still like because you've still got to get to that second day. Like I had it where it got to a similar position and then looped back, and you have Will Poulter's character, the Colin Rittman, who we'll get to,
Mm-hmm.
basically answering. And that was when I sort of said no. And he says about all the things about it takes a bit of madness. I know where you're going. You've got to be on your own. It takes a bit of madness, and all that sort of like is answering that stuff that's coming and stuff. And so I don't know. I was like, it feels like I'm being manipulated a little bit by what's being presented on screen to them being like, even where the choice, even which side lit up first.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't like always like, we'll always start on the left.
Mm-hmm.
They varied. And I thought that was kind of interesting as well. So there's manipulation going on in the way it's built.
Well, and there are always two choices, with the exception of entering the code to call the psychiatrist's phone number. It's always two choices, but those two choices change based on which paths you've taken, right?
Yes.
Especially like, do you say your Netflix and then, or the little glyph, or PAX, which has to be the stupidest thing I've ever seen. PAX. I mean, this whole Pac-Man thing, and then the other thing is the code on the safe. There are like 4 options for, and yeah, so yeah, I mean, it does sort of loop back. I mean, there are incidental choices where, like, for example, when you fight with the psychiatrist, you can say yes or fuck yeah, and either one result in a fight, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Same thing, like you choose the music he listens to. Well, that'll get a reference later on, like you'll see a commercial for whatever, cereal you chose. Other than that, it doesn't make any difference in the narrative. It's just kind of like training you. Early on, I'm able to accept that because it's just training you to, make your first choices, right? But I did actually, having gone through it 2 entire times, I did look up a map of all the choices, and I thought there must be some satisfying ending here that I haven't gotten to. Nope, I've done everything.
There's only 5 endings. Yeah,
that thing.
Yeah, there's only 5 endings. Well, so I did some reading, and if you go into some of the readings, what's interesting is so there's a little bit of like the history behind this episode, which is so this originally was going to be a part of season 5, and it was going to be an hour long. And then when it was written out, and Brooker started writing it, and he presented it to Netflix, basically the technical guys were like, "This isn't easy to do. This isn't, to make this a streaming thing, we're going to have to maybe even come up with some things or ways of doing this." And then the article I was reading went into sort of how they did it with their servers and stuff. And I was like, it's kind of interesting, but like they were like, okay, this needs to be its own independent thing. And then that way it gave them more time. But originally as well, the thing that Brooker wanted to do was a lot more ambitious. And Netflix again was like, at this point, we can't do that. Like, not just a budgetary thing, but like we just can't, like the amount of server space this is going to take up and other stuff, like it's just not possible.
Well, and every time you add like another variable, right? Like say tracking another decision you made, then you've got twice as many sets of variables. I mean,
it starts to expand. Yeah. So right. I do get that feel that they were like much like the guy that runs the place, TurboSoft, or like him going over the shoulder, going like, yeah, the sort of the thing of Microsoft. What was his name? There you go. Mohan Thakur, the guy who runs the place, who's like, why have you put in another, he's like, don't do that, just don't do this, don't do that. Like, he's trying to sort of like make sure it's out by Christmas. I can imagine there's a bit of a commentary about Netflix as well there over like Brooker's shoulder, going like, no, look, you don't need any more branches, just stop it there, that's all right. Like, he's got to loop round and do all this other stuff. But I still think I still like what they've tried to do, and this is one of the things the reason I like this, and I think you and I have said it. Well, you've said it before about swinging for the fences. Like, I know this isn't a full-on swing for the fences, but it's trying something where I've watched the other sort of conceptual Black Mirror episodes, but they're very they end up being quite linear or straightforward, or I'm like, yeah, I get the point, but it's not, this isn't actually that clever. This is sort of like, look, here's the idea. Kind of acknowledges it's not clever, but it adds like another layer onto it as well. And so I thought, like, the way it all worked together, I was just like you said, charmed, I think is a good word. I was charmed with me being invested in this. Like, it brought me in to be invested in what was going on. And that's why it worked for me. If I'm like you and went back and did it a second time, I don't think I would be as charmed, but I think I would still be interested.
Well, I think so. The first time I went through, I probably did it for 2 hours, and I did the entire narrative, all the possibilities. I was like, I never wanted to continue through the credits. Although you get that one ending where you see the credits and then it goes to Netflix and it,
Yeah.
So I like that kind of stuff. But, and for me, that was the most satisfying ending. But then I went back and spent like another 2 hours going through trying to find additional paths and making sure that I had done every single path. And that was just, a horrible experience. I mean, I would just say that, like, I'd say maybe half an hour to an hour in the first time through, I had a similar reaction to you, where I was just like, I'm charmed by this. Wow, points for doing something different. Like, points for really pushing the envelope here. That's great. I love the metafictional stuff. I love the sort of like, I'm from the future and controlling you, and as integrated into a sort of psychological breakdown as he's trying to do a game that's also about controlling choices, and his mentor who wrote the Bandersnatch novel having gone crazy, and I mean, all of this is kind of interesting. And then there's the Netflix angle, but none of those ideas are really fleshed out. And I wound up going back through and just looking. I wanted some narrative, any of the strands, to be fleshed out in any way, and none of them are. It's like a collection of ideas.
Yes.
And that, and a collection of scenes, none of which are satisfying, none of which are fleshed out. And the more time I spent, the more disappointed with it I became. So I sort of started very charmed and really impressed with them doing this. And after an hour or so, it just became diminishing returns until I was just angry at it.
Maybe, I mean, you're like the reviewer that was reviewing the Bandersnatch game, where you were like, well, he just sort of trails off, it doesn't do this and that, like you say. I don't know. There's something about this, and maybe I'm reading into this more than is necessary. But the reason I like to say, there's all the metafiction, there's all the stuff. Like, I think some of the things work better than others. This whole the idea of PAX, the program and control study, is silly. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, it's not. But I think this is where, because the endings, or because some of the branches do actually vary quite dramatically in their content rather than the payoffs are all very much the same. They all end up at that office, really, don't they? They all sort of end up in a similar place. But the route can be sort of varied. But this idea of like PAX, the program and control, and the finding out that his dad is some scientist or some sort of anthropologist or whatever the hell he's doing, and he's been drugging his kid and sort of. I was like,
Maybe.
well, maybe, yeah, exactly. But like, this was it. But this is the point. So one of the things I was like, well, that varies a great deal from the one where, we have that's much more straightforward, and it's just the frustration of getting the game together. And he goes insane thinking about the dual paths that the author that he was following went down.
Babies or whatever. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And so I was like, okay, but like one of they try to sort of they build in too much, and I think this is one of the things, like you say, they're trying to sort of answer too much and but in doing so answer too little. And so one of the things, obviously, like in every time they loop round, you see the dad lock his bedroom door.
Mm-hmm.
And instantly, the moment I thought that for the first time, I was like, oh, well, this is clearly going to go somewhere. Like, that's clearly important for, that seems a weird thing to focus on. But then when you get into there, like you said, you never really get an answer. He has this cabinet that's locked that you need the password for. And then, it can be PAX, it can be toy, it can be JFD, the initials of the author, that sort of thing.
And it can be the monster's name, which is
Pack.
Yeah, PAX, or it can be PAX PACS for the program and control. Right. So there are 4 options ultimately.
Yeah. And there was, but then, like you say,
which is really dumb. Let's be clear. I mean, you have a locked safe. It's really dumb. Like that there are multiple answers that unlock different doors of the safe.
But they're all different timelines, aren't they? The choices you make are different timelines. So it's not different choices. It's in one timeline.
Do you have the teddy bear? Do you have the teddy bear thing locked up, but you don't in others? I mean, you have to assume this is him going crazy, right? Like,
yeah, 100%.
The whole PACS thing. This is just him going crazy. None of this is real, and it doesn't matter anyway because that's not satisfying.
Yeah, and that's the thing is when you do start to if you take this as a linear thing, all right. So don't go. So just do it, play it, make decisions until you get to the end, all right. And you get to where you're getting. All right, so that's what I did the first time through. I was like, I'm not going to go back. I'm not going to do anything. I am literally just going to play it through, and I'll end up where I end up. All right, and I'll make decisions as I go. Happy with that. And I chose the first time round. I chose the wrong password. Wouldn't let me in. I think I chose.
What did you choose?
I'm trying to think. What
PAX, the monster?
No, I think I chose the JFD, the initials,
okay, yeah.
And it just wouldn't open, and that was it. And then we move on. So you never get to see what's in the cabinet because he gets distracted. Something happens, and then it goes on from there. So I did in my first time round. I didn't kill my dad because obviously I got to the fight ending where the dad comes in. So I got down that path, and I was like, okay, cool. It's sort of like it's him. To me, it felt like because the PAX thing wasn't in there. I didn't even have I didn't follow. I didn't follow Colin Rittman. I didn't follow him, so I didn't have any of the stuff in the first time through. I didn't have any of the stuff in the apartment in the flat, and I just got to the end. So it was quite short. And I was like, "Oh, that's weird," but it was someone's decline. It was just his mental state, like in decline, and all this other stuff.
Well, let's be clear, that wasn't the first time through, because the first time through you said yes to the development.
Yeah. Oh.
So you're talking about like the longer second time.
Yeah, okay. So I say yes, it gets to the Christmas and it's like, and then it goes back and the timeline starts again. Yeah, all right, fair enough. So it went through and it felt like someone's mental deterioration. There is the meta thing. I chose the glyph, and I want to talk about that glyph as well. And it gets to the end, but that's when I was like, the ending's a bit cack, like it's a bit abrupt, and I was like, oh, okay. But I've kind of liked this journey of getting there. But the problem I had with it was, it was it was kind of short, but also like his spiral into madness, let's say, is very quick.
Yeah.
It's like Monday, fine. Tuesday, fine. Wednesday, a little confused. Thursday, very confused. Friday, insane.
Mhm.
Like it's it's just abrupt over a couple of days or even over a weekend or like I know they're trying to play out that he's been in there for months, but again because I think they're trying to compact it, you don't get that sense of longevity of like a creator being eaten alive by his own creation kind of thing.
Well, let me just kind of back up and say, like, so I followed Colin,
Hmm.
the second time through, right? Because we both did the yes ending to the
Hmm.
programmer. Um, so I followed him. I volunteered Colin to jump.
Oh, I did too.
Colin
Yeah.
jumps. Then it all starts over again.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay. Well, we're reiterating that seems to prove Colin's point. You're forced to go to the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist ups the meds. You have to either flush or throw the meds out. Doesn't matter what you choose. You just are shown slightly different
Mm.
thing. But so he's off his meds, so that kind of makes sense for him starting to
Mm.
spiral out. But then from him starting to spiral out, if you choose to throw yourself off, that's less satisfying. I went back through and tried all these other things. So there are a lot of sort of narrative threads. And the more you go, the more sort of narrative threads start. The initial narrative thread is him working for Tuckersoft, trying to develop this game with Colin as his mentor. The longest best case scenario is Colin kills himself and you restart, yet he's still missing
Mm.
as if he killed himself. Um, that's never explained, never makes any sense. He never appears again. He drugs you. Whether you say yes or no, he drugs you anyway. So
And this is what I'm saying about
again,
the
that doesn't
choices.
matter.
But this is the thing I'm saying about how much of a choice do we actually have?
Well, I
Um,
mean, you can look up the map of all the
mm,
choices. You can see them. There are a lot of different paths through, but there are a lot of choices that wind up resulting in, either the same thing happening or just going to one of those other paths that you've seen before. Um, but my point is, so like breaking this down, the whole Colin thing and the Tuckersoft game developing thing, those are presented as sort of the initial problems,
mm,
right? Neither of those have anything like a satisfying ending.
mm, mhm.
The best case scenario is Colin kills himself, you restart, and Colin's missing for no reason. There's no timeline in which you hang out with Colin and he tells you what's going on or something. Um, or he really becomes a mentor and whatever. No, that's just some ideas that don't really go anywhere. You see lots of different endings in which the game is released and gets reviewed at the end of the timeline or whatever before you restart. None of them are a great review. None of them are really what you wanted to do with the game or what the character wanted to do with the game. Then you have all these timelines in which he goes crazy and it just stops because he went crazy, or he killed his dad and goes to jail and it's like better luck next time. Okay. I mean, at least those present a full picture of him having gone crazy developing this game.
Mm.
And in some of those, you get like, a game review ending, where it's like, I feel weird reviewing this game because everyone knows the story. Okay, yada, yada, yada. But so I feel like none of those key main timelines are ever go anywhere interesting. None of them are ever satisfying. All of the initial ideas never pay off. And then you have all of these weird branching timelines with packs, with the toy, with I mean, it's cool to see like that set design. I mean, there's a lot of Donnie Darko influence in
Mm. Oh
here,
God, yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
which is a terrible movie. It's kind of again that's the same thing where it's like you love it the first time through, and you're like, oh, this is really fascinating. I'm sure there's so much that I'm missing, and then you watch it the second time and you're like, no, this is phenomenally dumb. Um, so I don't know. I mean, all the timelines with Pax and the toy, and his childhood was a dream, and it's really Netflix.
I think,
And,
yeah, but I think one of the things I'll take from it because you are right, you are right, and about the timelines, and one of the things as I went through it again and again, I went through the different things, and you do the different paths, and I can go back and I'll try this, and I got the phone number wrong to the psychiatrist, so I went back and did it again, and that sort of thing. Not because I got the bloody letters wrong, but because someone to be unnamed nudged my remote whilst I was doing the numbers, and I got the wrong bloody last number. But what I found is that you're right, that I think this is a big failing of this, is the endings. I think the endings are either abrupt or a little bit unsatisfying, but mostly I think they're just derivative. I think they're all derivative. Like I could point you at all kinds of things, like you say, Donnie Darko, Life on Mars, other things like that, where I'm just like, oh yeah, it's come from that. Oh, it's from that. Like, it's quite evident where a lot of these things have come from. But what I would say is, I find that with most games I used to play. I haven't been a gamer for a long, long time. But I used to play games, and there was a couple of games like this. There was a game called The Suffering. I played. It was on PS2. That's how old I am. I was playing this on the PlayStation 2 over a decade ago. And the idea of that is you were a prisoner that there's been a problem. There's an earthquake, and these demons and things have been escaped into the prison, and you've then got to survive and get to the boat. Right. It's a really good game, actually. But the way that you treat people along the way determines the ending that you get. And there's like 3 or 4 endings that you can have. You can either get, if you treat people right and well and make some decisions, you get on the boat, someone saves you, gets on the boat, and you get away, all the way through to you've been horrible to people, and you actually get taken over by the spirit of the island and become a demon, and so on and so forth, right? It felt like that. And I'm like, well, the endings in that game were always a bit like, oh, cool. That was it. But the playing of the game, the making of the decisions, the working through and seeing those paths and all that sort of stuff, that's where the entertainment was for me. And that's where I was like, when I was doing this, I was like, yeah, the endings are all a bit cack, but actually I'm kind of liking the way that this is taking me through. I'm actually kind of like chuckling to myself when I can choose like to the Netflix. I was kind of disappointed when Netflix didn't go ba-boom on his screen. But you sort of have someone say to him, I'm watching you from the 21st century. I was enjoying all this stuff as you go along, like all those different versions. And I agree. I think the least satisfying one is the PAX one. I think that's the dumbest of them all, when you find out his dad's this scientist or whatever. But this whole thing of like this madness of creation and thing, like, it's obviously on medication and stuff, but like, and this idea of program control, like, it's all superficial, like, it's all very silly. But I was enjoying the journey. I think what it is, I like the investment of it. Like, it's not a game you can go back to. Like, this isn't like a game where you can go, oh, cool, I'm going to go play, Arkham Knights or whatever again. Like, it's not that. But just in the depths of it, I was like, yeah, I feel like I'm having a bit of an impact on this story. I like the way I like the performances. I'm liking the sort of, the journey through it. And I think that's where this thrives for me, was in the journey rather than the ending. Because you're right, I think the endings are all terrible. Not terrible, but they're just cack. They're just not satisfying.
Well, again, I don't know that I disagree with you, at least for sort of my first 30 minutes or so, in. But, I mean, I haven't had a lot of time recently, but I am a gamer, and I played a lot of games through their conclusion. And you were talking about that one. I mean, like, let's say you finish GTA 5, and you sort of have to decide, who do I kill, or do I kill nobody and stand up to the mobsters? And you have different endings depending on that. Okay. I mean, but here's the thing: all of the endings you describe, like you become evil and you become a demon, or you do get to the boat, those provide at least some conclusion to the narrative that you've been presented. None of those endings are, oh, by the way, this was all set up by aliens, and you're abducted and in a flying saucer, and you see yourself being tortured in the saucer, and that's the game. It's like, all of the endings here are like that. All of the endings here have nothing to do with anything you've seen previously. They're all like weird, random things, very unsatisfying.
Yeah.
All go off in multiple random directions. And so all of those games that you're talking about, at least, like, even if you fail and you become a demon or whatever, that makes sense within the narrative you've gotten so far. and I often bitch about like movies these days, and how illogical they are, and how they don't set up the twist from the beginning or whatever. This seems to just embrace that, where I mean, like, what is with the magic mirror thing? With going back through the mirror, it's very Donnie Darko. He's a kid, there's this whole idea of like flashbacks that Colin suggests. Like, flashbacks are your opportunity to change the past. Well, that's fascinating. That never happens. I mean, he goes back and he's a kid and he finds the the rabbit. The rabbit also feels Donnie Darko, but okay.
Oh,
but
that was what I was going to say. By the way, when I said I'm coming back to the rabbit, I was like, that's what I wanted to say. I was like, oh, is that an Easter egg? That was what I wanted to guess. I was like, is that like an homage to Donnie Darko? I wasn't sure, but
there's no payoff there, right? I mean,
well,
there's just a loose collection of ideas, and then
yeah, but that's it. But that's Black
the
Mirror.
narrative just continues.
But that's Black Mirror in a nutshell, surely. Like, there's a loose
But that's
collection of ideas.
not. I mean, the worst episodes of Black Mirror, the ones that you and I have complained about bitterly, follow their idea through. Now, they might elaborate on that idea too much, to the point where the idea is strained and falls apart, or you keep asking questions about it until, like, it's clear that there is no wider world here, right? Or something like that. But it doesn't, the worst Black Mirror episode doesn't say halfway through, it is a conspiracy, all of this is fake, and it's been faked by the government. And then 2 minutes later, all of this is fake, and it's actually a simulation. And 2 minutes later, the simulation is fake, and it's actually a Netflix show. And 2 minutes later, you see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, but like you say, but depending on your choices, like one of those is end up being sort of true. Like, like you say with packs, like, you can make a choice where it's not true. But I mean, for example, the one you said about his child, sorry, him going back in through the mirror and him changed. I mean, the ending there is him dying in the chair because he did change the pack. He's still in the chair, but that's the one to me that was like, oh, that's the Life on Mars one. Like, he's gone back in time, made a choice consciously to go with his mother, and he died on the train when he was 6 or whatever age
and
it
that
was.
causes him in another timeline to die in a psychiatrist's office.
Yes.
How does that make sense? I mean,
it doesn't, but I'm saying that's what happens.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the, like, my brain has to be scraped by a lobotomy in order to enjoy or make any sense of it.
This feels like, there were certain things that I was watching this and picking up references and like I say, it's derivative in many places. And I accept what you're saying. I said, then some of the endings work better than others. I think most of them are cacked, like they're abrupt or they don't work, or I'm a bit like, oh, that's the ending. Like, I think in all honesty, I think the most successful part for me is that when he kills his dad, it just sort of makes this lashing out makes the most sort of sense when you go through this whole sort of thing. I'm like, okay, it's a crime. He's lost his mind. It's all hallucination, and he's, ends up killing his dad.
And winds up in prison.
Yeah, that's the one that makes the most sense.
You do have the connection with the dog, because early on he says, oh, that dog will be the death of me. It's in the yard, right?
Yeah.
And then after he's killed, the dog is digging up the corpse, right?
Yeah.
So without that ending, there's no payoff for those early comments.
So I didn't get that ending first. I got the one where they fight. However, when it got to that ending, and he killed his father, and it gets that scene, I was instantly in my head, I was like, I think this is the first one he wrote. And then he's gone, let's move on from there. And as you say, he's then gone back and gone, right, I'll branch off from this point, and then we'll do this, and then we'll do that, and that. And as you get further away, I think, from that original, that first written ending, they become more and more stupid. And I think the fighting ending is the stupidest ending and makes the least sense. But some of the others, I'm like, okay, I can see what you're trying to do. It's a a delusion, or it's this, or it's that. But I don't know. Maybe I should go through this. I mean, like you said, I was doing this for like 2.5 hours, going through the different bits and pieces and stuff. I was gonna confuse, like you said.
Don't go back, man.
I'm not going to. No, I don't think I will. I don't think I will. I don't think I will go back to it. I enjoyed the ride. I think that's the point. I enjoyed the ride when it happened. And it's good. I enjoyed the fact they swing for the fences. But the point is, like, this is there are either homages or it is derivative in a number of places. But I was thinking, like, as well, we've said this before, like that Charlie Brooker thinks he's cleverer than he actually is, or at least he thinks his writing is smarter than it is. But again, with this, I was like, oh, okay, this feels a little bit like he's had an inkling of an idea about like creators that have gone crazy. Like I'm thinking like Philip K. Dick writing the Exegesis. Was it after?
Which I dug the Ubik poster,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's it.
that
I
was
saw
cool.
those. Yeah, so after he had, was it 2374? He called it was the moment, and after that, like he had this thing about reality and control, and he had his sort of psychedelic break. So that was like clearly in my head, where I was like, oh, this is clearly referencing that, like this idea. But then I was thinking, like, yeah, there've been other things of like, other writers have made claims of seeing things, or but that they haven't gone insane, but they've made claims. And I was thinking, like, Grant Morrison obviously makes his claim of seeing something in Timbuktu, and Alan Moore claims to have met John Constantine, and Stephen King has made comments about meeting one of his characters, and you go on and on, you go, okay, like, creatives are generally just a little bit wackadoo. You know what I mean? Like, you have to be, I think, to be that invested in sort of like your imagination, maybe.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. This is when you find out, Julian, that there's no one here. This is just you talking to yourself. Yeah, I don't know. It just feels like that again, there's a crumb of an idea. There's an idea in here, or multiple ideas. And I like the scene and I really like Will Poulter. I think he's a great actor, and I'm glad he's getting his due a little bit now as he's got older. And sort of like, when he is that Colin Rittman, I kind of like that character. And I was so disappointed that when he's gone. I was like, oh no, I want him back. I want him to be sort of like, as you said, something at the end, like an almost supernatural character that just pops out the woodwork at the end. That's like, it's like, yeah, I told you it was all nuts, didn't I? Hey, right, well, back to the beginning.
Well, he seems to know that they're in, at least he's got some notion of these branching timelines and whatnot.
Yeah.
And he's got a theory about flashbacks and everything else. But the furthest you can get with him is him killing himself. But then again, you restart, but he's still missing. But
which is trying to, yeah. So is it saying that, like, this is, but yeah, but I'm saying, like, that's in that there should be something that explains that, or at least gives you a hint. Maybe not explains it, but at least gives you enough information to be like someone saying there is no Colin Rittman, or Colin Rittman, passed away in his sleep, or like even in this timeline, like that's it, he's blown his chances. There's something happened that's sort of like stuck or something. I don't know. So yeah, there is. I'm not gonna lie, there are faults. I like that. I just want to highlight the main character there, the main actor, Fionn Whitehead. I think he actually does a really good job in this, sort of carrying this episode. And I think a lot of the cast actually do a really good job. So it's more so than some of the other episodes we've watched of Black Mirror. This obviously exists. We talked about the Black Museum on the last show, and we talked about that having a lot of Easter eggs and stuff. And this carries it forward. And I like the joke when they make there's a metalhead game. I thought that was great, and I was like, oh, cool, I'll play that. That sounds like a cracking game. However, the Nosedive, yeah, which obviously
it has no bearing on the episode, though, right? It's just the
Nosedive
the title.
Well, yeah, there is that. There is, but no, it does, because what does Will do? He takes a nosedive off a balcony. Like, he's made the game that he ends up.
But it has no bearing on the episode Nosedive, right? No. Which is about your social ranking.
Yeah, that's just they've just taken They've taken it and gone, well, nosedive literally means taking a nosedive off of a cliff, so that's the game. So I was like, okay, but yes. And there's a few of this, but the one that stuck out to me is the glyph, which is the branching symbol of, it comes down in the middle and then branches off into two stalks. And I was watching it going like, that appears a lot in. It kept popping up in the background of the Black Museum, like it's on the wall, it's on several things. And I was like, why have I seen it? Where is it most? Where's this from? And then it clocked. I was like, I know where it's from. It's the symbol in White Bear. from season 2. It's the white symbol that the character, when it's revealed, you find out that her boyfriend had it tattooed on the back of his neck. Now and her boyfriend had gone crazy and taken her with him. And it obviously appeared on the TV, and it's on the mask when they're chasing her. Their masks when they're chasing it down, but they're only wearing it on their masks because this symbol, this glyph, has become affiliated with her as a criminal. But all I could think of is, yeah, this dude had it tattooed on the back of his neck. I wonder if he, is this supposed to be a sort of like, oh, he went crazy because of a similar thing? Like,
that's very cool, right?
yeah.
I mean, sure. Right. I mean, but I'm kind of okay. So that's very cool. Let me just stop and acknowledge that's very cool, and I'm glad that you made that connection. I hadn't thought about that. But that is a very cool connection. At the same time, I'm kind of getting irritated with these references to other episodes now. And we've seen them all along where there's kind of these Easter eggs, but nothing fits together. They've all been written autonomously. They're not meant to take place in the same world. They clearly don't take place in the same world. But occasionally we're going to have references as if they kind of do, or as if they're, a Netflix show, or as if they exist in some other way, as video games or whatever. But clearly there's no there. It's just a little like winking. And I'm somebody who, I mean, think about like our primer discussion. Like, I will spend a lot of time if I think there's a there, mapping stuff out and figuring out how everything works. There's nothing here to figure out,
No.
I mean, like, I instantly have this feeling of like that time will not be rewarded, right?
Yeah.
So
do not go down that rabbit hole because there is no reward at the end of it. Like, it doesn't work.
So no, that's very cool. I like that idea. It's that's sort of the most satisfying one by far. But at the same time, the sort of like winky stuff is starting to grate on me.
No, I agree. Well, I think you and I come to the same point now. We're 4 seasons in, and a feature length episode. And what I'm kind of finding is, like those first 2 seasons that when I was like, oh yeah, this is great, and it's sort of like I'm all in, and it's dark, or it can be quite funny, or there was stuff we were criticizing, but we were like, yeah, but it's trying for this, trying for that. Now I'm getting to the point, they say, where I'm just like, oh, it's the same idea again. Like, there's only so much he's going to be recycling this thing about sentient bloody pixels, and then it'd be like, then it's going to be loaded with references or Easter eggs, and I'm like, yeah, this isn't a Marvel film. Stop that stuff. Like, just focus on your storytelling. Now it's beginning to feel a little bit like I said, like the next 2 seasons, I am growing more and more concerned that we're entering into a territory of, I think we've reached its peak. I honestly think the more I reflect on what you said on the last episode with regards to the last series, I look back and I was like, yes, I had real issues with Hang the DJ, but overall that season was pretty solid.
Yeah, I agree.
More so than others. And I'm thinking that I think we've hit our peak. I think we're now into the slide of Black Mirror. Now, I really like this. I did enjoy it, as I say, as a way through. I thought it was a game. It was an entertainment piece. But it's not like a thriller where I can go back and be like, oh, yeah, I've got to go back. And I'm going to, but, Bandersnatch is going to be on my, on my cycle. I'm going to go back and I'll be watching this again in next year or whatever. Or I'll go, oh, I haven't watched that for ages. It doesn't, it's a game. It's an experience. You do it once and then that's it. It feels more like that. Like I enjoyed it. I'm glad they did it. I think it's a good experience, but it's throwaway, isn't it? This is kind of throwaway at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you say is interesting about us kind of getting irritated as time goes on with Black Mirror. And I do think that sort of objectively season 4 is a really good season. But it also is irritating, and it's irritating because we see the personal tropes, the repeated stuff. the same sorts of errors, the same sort of pitfalls. I think that, for me, Bandersnatch was so unsuccessful because none of it, you're right that, there are, sort of just he goes crazy and winds up killing his dad. That is, a short episode, but it, would work as an episode, right? It's not a very satisfying ending, but at least it brings all of the, stuff to an ending, except Colin, right? You know, I'm not sure if you followed Colin in that, in that one. But
Hmm.
certainly, like, okay, so the game never gets made, it never gets finished, or it's finished by other people, right? And it's less successful. So, okay, that is what it is. That's kind of satisfying, but it's like, I mean, like the Pax monster, we see twice. Once when he's on acid, and once if you enter that into the code.
Code, yeah.
That's on the title card for the show. It's on the cover for the Bandersnatch game. It's not very interesting. Nothing ever happens there. It's just like that's a hallucination monster that you see a couple times. And I think the same thing is true. I mean, at least like the psychiatrist in your preferred, ending is a psychiatrist, but in other ones she is, I mean, it is, I don't know, it reminded me of Everything Everywhere All at Once, that terrible overrated movie.
Yeah.
Where it's just like nothing makes sense. I mean, that's a movie that explicitly says we refuse to follow the rules of narrative or logic because it's charming. And having told you that, it's now okay to do anything. And that was the sort of like jump the shark moment of, hey, why not have them fight? Where I don't know, it was so ghastly for me. So I don't know. I sort of feel like I don't know if the show has peaked. I hope not. Maybe we'll like at least some episodes of 5 and 6 better than we expect. But I will say, I mean, for me, what is unpardonable is not even repeating your own ideas and maybe have a slightly different version of them. A lot of writers do that. That might not result in a great episode or a great comic or a great movie or whatever, but at least it's a slightly different, version of those ideas. You're thinking slightly differently about them. I'm okay with that. Not every episode or every thing an artist produces has to be great. What I'm upset by is the lack of concern with following through with even telling a superficially complete arc with any of your ideas. And for me, that's just an unpardonable offense, right? I mean, it is tantamount to, and we have seen things like this, watching a superhero movie where somebody says, right, but the power gem that controls the entire universe was hidden in your helmet the whole time. Okay. Oh, and actually, it's magic, not science. Okay. Why did I spend 2 hours, and I'm an alien and haven't told anyone? But none of this makes sense for anything we've seen previously. We've gotten to this point in terms of narrative where we apparently find it charming to just be poorly written, where being poorly written has become its own benefit to people. Aha, that's a twist. Yet the same people will decry M. Night Shyamalan for,
no, I agree.
twist
Yeah, I know
that
what you're
made
saying.
far more sense.
Yeah, and I actually think partly, I think M. Night Shyamalan is partly to blame for this. I also think someone like J.J. Abrams is to blame for this as well. His idea of the mystery box of just sort of like, like, no, that's just a cop out. Like, you've got to tell a cohesive finale for a story, for it to work. And I agree. I think I do agree in the sense that there are writers and filmmakers that do this, and in some cases it works better than others. I actually like to meet Everything Everywhere All at Once on its terms, and I actually really enjoy that film. But there are other cases when you are just like, this is when it comes in at the last minute, and all of a sudden that Deus Ex Machina comes in, and you're like, hang on, like, this has never been mentioned before. Like, what is this? Those kinds of things do get a little irritating. I honestly think part of it is because people are trying to sort of there is a desperate need to try and find an alternative narrative path, isn't it? They're like, oh, we can't do the same thing over and over again. We've produced everything to death. We've got to do something different. So when you do get anything that's sort of like polished and different from the norm, it often gets praised. But then you and I, or even anybody, when you go at it with a full-on critical eye, like you can be charmed by it and go, I really enjoy that film, but I acknowledge it makes no bloody sense. Like or there are questions asked within the film that never receive an answer, and that's really unsatisfying. Or even acknowledge that it's actually been answered, and answering it isn't part of the problem. It shouldn't be part of the. We shouldn't worry about it. Like, at least acknowledge it in some way. And I think you're right, though. I think that's part and parcel of sort of modern. They're trying to make it as modern storytelling. I don't think it'll work. I don't think it'll stick because none of those films end up have any staying power. They become a bit of a, it's the norm, or it's interesting, becomes a flash in the pan, and then no one really revisits them. So, but we shall see.
Well, I mean, I would contrast those things that we're complaining about with something like I'm all for stuff that doesn't make sense, that's fun, and I do agree. Like you're talking about novelty, right? So, obviously we're in the West. We praise novelty in fiction. At the same time, novelty by itself, and this is, like when, any conversation about Abrams or Shyamalan, has to make this point that just having the twist is not satisfying, right?
Yeah.
It's when the twist is logical. Just having novelty isn't satisfying. It's when the novelty is logical or at least internally consistent. I'm a huge fan of stuff like Kung Fu Hustle or Shuno, which do not take themselves seriously, but they have the same tone from beginning to end. They're not in a realistic universe, but they're an extravaganza.
It's that thing you said there. It's internal logic. Like the film starts with that and ends with that, and you're fine with that.
Right, and it lets you know this is the universe we're in. My problem is when I'm watching The Dark Knight, and 30 minutes in, it turns into Kung Fu Hustle and says there's an everything bagel, and then I, want to go out and murder people. Okay, not a joke. Bandersnatch is like that. Like, you can go through Bandersnatch and there are mildly successful sort of like, I think you're right in what you said about that's probably the most eternally consistent ending. I sort of like the Netflix ending because then you can just say none of it matters anyway, right? It's all like this. We know this is a shitty episode, but it's a shitty episode of a Netflix show, right? So that kind of gets a pass for me. But it's all this kind of like just random diversions, random, being sideswiped by a wholly different tone, a wholly different set of ideas that don't fit, that don't go anywhere. And I feel like we see this more and more. And it's not just, everything everywhere all at once. I mean, it's snuck into a lot of, conventional narratives, blockbuster superhero stuff, that just introduce weird aspects, totally change their universe halfway through. And, I mean, that's just incompetent writing. And I think somebody has to call that.
No, I agree. I think it is fair to call it out. We have to I'm sure we'll come across some examples in the future, but I think it's with Bandersnatch. I think you're right. I think if you can get let's call it the true crime ending, right? The one that would end up becoming a true crime documentary on Netflix. That does make the most sense. It becomes a thrill. It becomes the story of some kid who, is thrown himself into something, and the stress of it affects his mental health. He then decides not to take his medication, and there's a tragic end to it. It works. Yeah, the other stuff becomes dreamlike, doesn't it? It's that sort of thing of, there's all these crazy alternatives. But you said that the crazy alternatives are so vastly different. It's like we've got the true crime ending, then we've got the Twilight Zone or Eerie Indiana ending, where it's just a studio and here's a show, or like you say, the Kung Fu Hustle ending, or the Life on Mars ending, or it's all these different things, and you go, okay, well, how is that cohesive? You say with what the others are like. The whole thing with I'm just going to go back because the whole thing with the Pax is the one that bothers me the most. That thing of him learning his dad's been studying him and was drugging him as a kid, all this other stuff, and that's the one that I'm like, straight away I was like, this doesn't seem to make any sense because none of his behavior before this is highlighted. He's seeing a therapist, and also seeing a therapist in 1984 in Britain is not a thing, by the way. Like, I don't think acknowledging psychiatry or psychology in 1984 was it. And also, you wouldn't have had someone from an older generation taking you. You'd have had them like in a full 80s style going, yeah, you're great, puffter, go and see a psychiatrist. Like, it would have been. It felt so out of place in a film set in 1984 that I was just like, this is really weird.
We had more of that over here, but
Oh yeah, it was an American thing, but like not in the UK. In the UK.
I am getting old because I do spot things where I'm just like, nope, that phrase wasn't used in '84. I mean, every time now that I see stuff from that era, I'm like, no, those are the wrong words, which don't really matter, right? I mean, that's just wording, me being an old fogey.
Yeah. And also, I get like it's required for the story and it helps, but it feels like a 21st century narrative being told in 1984 in places. So again, I'm going to knock it for that. But no, I don't know. It's an interesting attempt. Is what I find, and I say I'm not going to go back to it. I've got no intention of going back to it at any point. But I enjoyed the ride, and I'm grateful for them for taking the swing. This wasn't the only sorry, I want to say before we go on to the others, the one thing I was disappointed about, right? And I thought there was going to be either like a post credit or an end thing. Like, I thought you were going to get like a last decision to make, right? And while I was convinced this was coming, and maybe I've just been watching too many films. So the young guy who's the reviewer on the television show. I thought it was going to cut to him, and there'd be like him in a bookshop or something, and then there'd be the thing of like, does he pick up the book by the A.J. Davis, and you get to pick up? Yeah, well, should I get a copy of this? Yes or no? And it leave on that thing of like, oh, is this the start of another? Whatever this is starting over again with this sort of kid. But yeah, that didn't come, and I was a bit like, oh, that seems like an obvious choice. I'm disappointed that that's not there. It's a bit of a, denouement for you to
missed
have
opportunity.
Yeah, I thought I was a bit disappointed in that.
No, I think you're right, and I mean, I don't know. I don't want to look. I've expressed my frustration, but I mean, I think that I still would say, this is fine, but we get into the argument about like, not our argument, but the discussion of sort of like, how much do you give something points for being novel, for being new? I do think this is a sort of like noble experiment, but it seems like a kind of half-hearted experiment. And I think that for myself, look, I mean, I watch stupid Transformers movies, I mean, not all of them do I think are any good, but I watch dumb movies and can enjoy dumb movies. But I sort of have, I mean, in addition to maybe being a bit of a snob or, having a hard time being entertained, right, shall we say, by silly or stupid stuff. I also have sort of like a special hatred, a special like trigger that goes off in my brain when stuff sort of like takes a good swing, is trying to do something, and then fails so dramatic that it's sort of this kind of like uncanny valley of hatred in my brain, right? Where it's like something can try to be like a really well put together spy movie, except it's incompetently done and it doesn't even, realize its own terms. And I have a special kind of hatred for it, where it's like a dumb, espionage. I mean, a dumb James Bond movie is sort of like, yeah, it's not great, but I mean, it knows what it is.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, how do you grade these things? How do you understand? How do you bracket for that kind of novelty? And I'm often most irritated by stuff that swings for the fences, which I want things to do, and yet comes up so frustratingly short, so stupidly short that it like just really upsets me. It really just grates on me. And I don't know why that is. I mean, it's probably a personality failing of mine. Um, it's probably because I was a serial killer in one of these other timelines, but I don't know.
No, I know what you mean. I think we have voiced this with other films we've seen that we've like, this could have been so good and it's so disappointing. And I think is that disappointment, isn't it? When you go, oh, this is a great idea, like they can't fail here, and then when they do, you're a bit like, how? Oh man, they blew this opportunity. It's really disappointing. So I appreciate that. I know what you're saying. I don't think I feel that disappointed with it. I think it was I was going to say, for me, it's a fun ride. I think it was if anything, I would say. I mean, I get the feeling you feel this is the worst. If this was an episode, it fits within the show. For me, this isn't the worst episode of the show by a long margin. I still kind of
I'd say this and White Bear are about equivalent for me.
yeah,
but
and they're linked as well. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, I do think there's a big difference between like watching this one time through or kind of spending an hour with it versus saying I'm going to give this benefit of the doubt and actually study it, the way I did and want to explore every. I mean, it doesn't take you that long to go through most of the main narratives,
No.
But I mean, I really was like, oh, there must be stuff because I foolishly thought, well, there must be stuff that I'm missing, right? Because this is so incoherent. And poorly thought out. And so I, foolishly gave Brooker and Black Mirror the benefit of the doubt and spent more time with it. And I think that only solidified, oh, there's no there, right? And sometimes when we throw ourselves into something and start researching it and start, mapping it out or whatever, sometimes, like with Primer, it's like, okay, it's not perfect, but I appreciate it a lot more, right? And then sometimes, like with this, it's like, oh yeah, no, I see the errors here, how superficial it is.
It's a bit like you say when you have something that it looks all okay on the outside, and you open up the cabinet and find the wiring inside is an absolute mess, and you go, okay, it's barely hanging together. No, I know what you mean.
There's the glue holding it all in place.
Exactly. This wasn't the only interactive thing that Netflix did. It sort of set a bit of a not a precedent, but it set them on a course. However, I would say that they corrected slightly in two facets. All of the ones I'm just having a quick look at some here. All the ones that they did after this are a lot shorter. There's a couple that stand out. So there was one they did, Escape the Undertaker, which is a WWE wrestling one. That's kind of good fun, actually, by the way. I've done that one. There's a Puss in Boots one. There's a Johnny Test one. There's some other ones. There's some animal ones. Carmen Sandiego's in there. Jurassic Park. They're all aimed at kids.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference, is that this interactive element is they're all less than half an hour long. And they're aimed to be fun, and it's supposed to be like, turn left here, do this, do that. Like it feels, I think they're designed to be much more of that book that he holds is massively thick. I used to play choose your own adventure books. I used to do them when I was a kid. One of the first things I started reading, and they very much were quite quick reads. And it was sort of like, do you steal the gold from the dragon or do you do something else? And it's sort of like those, turn to page 16 or whatever. Good quick reads. That's the intent. I think they should be quite punchy and quite short and that sort of thing. And they work better as such. Well,
I think that's interesting because I read a lot of those, and I read a lot of the not choose your own adventure brand ones back in the 80s and the 90s. And obviously choose your own adventure sued,
yes,
Black Mirror over that reference, and is known as pretty litigious. But I whatever. I mean, I would say that some of my frustrations with those books, and I do like the idea of a sort of Bandersnatch giant kind of ambitious, branching narrative kind of novel.
Mm.
I like this idea. I mean, it's been done, right? Obviously, but
Mm.
I think part of my frustration with those books was always a that like you tell the book, right? You choose the turn right, and it's like, oh, there's a guy there who shoots you and you're dead. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well now I have to start over. Like, or the guy turns right, but then reconsiders it and does something, decides to take a spaceship, and you're like, that's not what I chose, and so you don't really feel like you have control. And this obviously reproduces that same problem, right? Which I
Mm.
think is kind of fine for a visual narrative. You're still sort of entertained by what you're seeing,
Yeah.
but obviously there are points where the character resists and will not do what you have chosen. But some of the I can see how if it were my choice first time through to say like don't take the acid and you wind up being dosed anyway, and it just leads to the same path, that being frustrating.
Yeah.
And then the other complaint that I had about those novels was that sometimes you would get to these endings where it was like this, where it was like, oh, this was all a conspiracy with these guys doing it. But then there were other paths where there was no conspiracy. And it's like, is this not set in the same universe? Like, is this not one universe with branching paths in that universe? Or is this actually like the whole universe is changing if you take this path? That seemed really bad writing to me.
Yeah. I
Like
think the
it
thing
was not
is,
a coherent universe.
no, you're right, and but I think we have to remember the audience. I think that's what the problem with this is. When you're a kid, maybe not you, but when I was a kid, like that variance was what actually kept me interested because I was like, oh, how could they end up in that one? All right, well, I've got to go back and I want to sort of do it again and try and make different choices. So like, I was easily entertained. Like I'm not the brightest person. I wasn't the brightest kid. So like
No,
I
mean,
like that kind of
right.
stuff. No, but I like that stuff. Like you say, there's variances. Like I wasn't accepting. If it was to happen in a linear novel, where like you say, it's sort of like you say the change in tone or the change in sort of like genre almost of films irritates and books irritates the hell out of me. But I don't know, choose your own adventure, those sort of things, and I'm more willing to accept those kinds of things. Anyway,
Well,
I think we
no, I
have.
was the boy who I'd get to the end and I'd be like, okay, I rescued the princess and I'm hanging out with Guy X. But I know from this other version that I
Yeah.
walked through that Guy X is part of a intergalactic conspiracy that I apparently haven't discovered in the happy ending. Is that still the case, or
is that still? Yeah, is it still a happy ending that I don't know about the conspiracy?
Yeah, I was really bothered by that kind of stuff as a kid.
Yeah.
Anyway,
we've sort of run to time. So anyway, Bandersnatch. I think we've sort of covered everything about it. But this is not the end, as we said, of our Black Mirror journey. We've still got seasons 5 and 6 to go, which I think is about 3 in the next series. So we've got 3 coming up.
3 and 5.
Yeah. So we're almost there, unless they bring out something incredible as we're recording this. But we will see. So let's see if there is anything that keeps us entertained in the next seasons. But if you like what we're doing, and leave a review, let us know, and also let us know what you think of Black Mirror. Are we being fair to it, or are we being too cruel? Being cruel to be kind, I think, at this point.
Julian's an asshole. I mean, that's what most of the tweets have just been.
But yes, they're all coming for you. We don't agree with Julian. Scott's amazing. I know.
Scott's quite reasonable.
Yeah.
No, that's what I think. That's I think I just assumed that will happen.
No. I think I think my opinion, my scathing review of Hang the DJ, I think was I think it's going to get the ire of somebody. I have no heart or romance. I think that's my problem. I don't want to see those people happy.
Yeah. You have no heart and no room for love in your heart. Julian is exploding with love, but way overly logical about every little objection.
Dismantling everything.
Between the two of us, we make a full review.
We make a full person, is what we do. So psychologically. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, yeah, leave a review. Go find your podcast catcher. Leave us a review, 4 stars, 5 stars preferably. But any feedback is welcome. And if you really like what we're doing and you like these kind of reviews, do go and check out the Patreon because we've got all kinds of stuff on there. We've got 30-minute thoughts. We've got trekking through the Twilight Zone, which we've done all kinds of bits on there. And we've also got bonus material for our main seasons. And we've got some really good stuff coming up for that as well. So for now, there, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you, Julian, for discussing and watching Bandersnatch.
Thank you. Look forward to season 5, and thanks for everyone for listening.
Yes, yeah. So in the next episode, join us for season 5. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We'll see you on the next episode.